My name is Ethan, and for years, my relationship with my older brother, Daniel, has been complicated, to put it mildly. We're talking oil and water, cats and dogs, you name the cliché. It probably applies to us. It wasn't always like this. Growing up, we were inseparable, partners in crime, the usual brotherly bond. But somewhere along the line, things shifted. Maybe it was when he started getting all the attention for his athletic prowess in high school, or maybe it was when he landed that high-paying job right out of college while I was still struggling to find my footing. Whatever the reason, a chasm grew between us, fueled by what I could only perceive as his constant need to one-up me. When Daniel announced his engagement to Sarah, a lovely woman who seemed genuinely smitten with him, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was happy for him, genuinely, I swear. He'd found someone, and that's a good thing, right? But another part of me felt that familiar pang of something. Envy? Resentment? Maybe just a weariness of the inevitable comparisons that would follow. My mom, bless her heart, was ecstatic. She'd always dreamed of seeing both her sons settled down. She immediately started planning the engagement party, the bridal shower, the whole shebang. Daniel, ever the golden boy, was basking in the attention. I tried to be supportive, offering congratulations and nodding along to wedding plans, but honestly, it felt like I was playing a role in a play I hadn't auditioned for. The wedding day loomed closer, and the pressure to get Daniel a suitable gift started to mount. My parents kept dropping hints about how generous some of his friends were being, mentioning expensive gadgets and lavish experiences. I'm not exactly rolling in dough. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and while I make a decent living, I don't have the kind of disposable income that would allow me to splurge on something extravagant. I racked my brain, trying to think of something meaningful, something that wouldn't break the bank but would still show Daniel that, despite our differences, I did care. Then it hit me. Words. I've always been better with words than with grand gestures. I decided to write him a letter. Not just a generic congratulations card, but a heartfelt letter expressing my true feelings about our relationship, the good times we'd shared, and my hopes for his future with Sarah. I spent weeks working on that letter. I poured my heart and soul into it, carefully choosing each word, wanting to strike the right balance between acknowledging our past tensions and expressing genuine affection. I wrote about our childhood adventures, the silly pranks we used to play, the times we had each other's backs when things got tough. I even touched on the more recent years, admitting my own part in the distance that had grown between us and expressing my sincere wish for us to rebuild our bond. The day of the wedding arrived, a beautiful Saturday in late spring. The ceremony was lovely, Sarah looked radiant, and even Daniel seemed genuinely happy, a rare sight these days. The reception was held at a fancy hotel downtown, the kind of place with valet parking and waiters in crisp white uniforms. The atmosphere was buzzing with celebration, filled with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of happy chatter. As the evening progressed, the time for the speeches arrived. Daniel's best man gave a funny, slightly embarrassing, but ultimately heartwarming speech. Then, my dad stood up and delivered a classic father of the groom speech, full of pride and well wishes. My mom even got up and shared a tearful anecdote about Daniel as a little boy. My stomach churned. I hadn't planned on saying anything publicly. I figured the letter would be my personal contribution to the day. But then, Daniel's eyes met mine across the room. He raised his glass in a silent toast, a small smile playing on his lips. It felt like an invitation, a silent acknowledgement of our complicated history. Taking a deep breath, I decided to say a few words. I wasn't a natural public speaker, but I felt compelled to say something more than just a quick congratulations. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and tapped lightly on my glass to get everyone's attention. Hi everyone, I began, my voice a little shaky. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ethan, Daniel's younger brother. A few polite chuckles rippled through the room. I wanted to say a few words. Daniel, Sarah, congratulations. You both look incredibly happy, and I wish you all the happiness in the world. So far, so good. I could feel my nerves starting to settle. Growing up with Daniel, I continued, trying to inject a bit of humor, was an experience. We had our moments, to say the least. Plenty of them involving stolen cookies, broken toys, and the occasional wrestling match that ended with one of us crying to Mom. More laughter. Okay, this was going better than I expected. But beneath all that, I said, my voice softening, there was always a bond, a brotherly bond that, despite everything, I've always cherished. I paused, taking another deep breath. This was the hard part. I wanted to give Daniel something special today, I said, reaching into my inside jacket pocket. I pulled out the carefully folded letter, the envelope crisp and white against my fingers. Something that came from the heart. Daniel looked at me, a curious expression on his face. Sarah leaned in beside him, her eyes also filled with curiosity. I wrote you a letter, Dan, I said, walking over to their table. It's everything I wanted to say. My hopes for you and Sarah. Some memories of us growing up. Just everything. I placed the letter in front of him, my hand lingering on the envelope for a moment. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. He didn't open it immediately, and a flicker of unease went through me. Was he expecting a fancier gift? Was he disappointed? Thanks, Ethan, he said, his voice neutral. He placed the letter down on the table beside his plate. The reception continued, and I tried to shake off the feeling of awkwardness. Maybe he'd read it later, in private. Maybe it would mean something to him then. I mingled with other guests, trying to engage in conversations, but my mind kept drifting back to the letter on the table. Later in the evening, after dinner and the first dance, the DJ started playing more upbeat music, and the dance floor filled up. I was chatting with one of Sarah's cousins when I saw Daniel pick up the letter again. My heart fluttered with a renewed sense of hope. Maybe he was going to read it after all. But instead of opening the envelope, he turned to Sarah, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Hey, everyone!" he called out, tapping on his glass, mimicking my earlier gesture. The music quieted down, and all eyes turned to him. My blood ran cold. What was he doing? "My wonderful brother, Ethan," Daniel began, a smirk spreading across his face, "wrote me a letter. Isn't that quaint?" A few people chuckled, and my stomach clenched. "He said it was from the heart," Daniel continued, picking up the letter and holding it up for everyone to see. "And knowing Ethan, it's probably full of all sorts of heartfelt sentiments." He paused for dramatic effect, and the laughter in the room grew louder. "Now, I'm not usually one for public displays of emotion," he said, his eyes twinkling with what I could only describe as malicious amusement. "But Ethan put so much effort into this. I thought it would be a shame not to share some of his wisdom with all of you." My face flushed with heat. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. He tore open the envelope, the sound ripping through the suddenly silent room. He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the first few lines. A theatrical sigh escaped his lips. "Dear Daniel," he read, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "On this momentous occasion, oh, Ethan, you always were one for the grand pronouncements." More laughter erupted from the guests. My parents exchanged worried glances across the room. He continued to read, his voice mocking and exaggerated, pausing at certain phrases to elicit more laughter from the crowd. He read about our childhood squabbles, twisting my words to make them sound petty and ridiculous. He even read the part where I admitted my own shortcomings in our relationship, making it sound like I was groveling for his approval. With each word he read, the humiliation washed over me in waves. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. How could he do this? This letter was personal, it was vulnerable, it was meant to be a peace offering. And he was turning it into a public spectacle, a source of amusement for his wedding guests. He finally reached the end of the letter, reading the closing lines with an exaggeratedly sentimental tone. He folded the letter with a flourish and held it up to the applause and laughter of the room. "Well, Ethan," he said, turning to me with a triumphant grin. "That was touching. Truly." I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with a mixture of anger and hurt. I just stared at him, my eyes burning with unshed tears. Sarah, to her credit, looked mortified. Her hand rested on Daniel's arm, and she was whispering something to him, her brow furrowed with concern. But he just shrugged her off, his attention still fixed on me, basking in the spotlight. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell him what a cruel and insensitive jerk he was. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I just stood there, feeling exposed and utterly humiliated. Finally, I managed to choke out a few words. You didn't have to do that, Daniel. My voice was barely a whisper. He just shrugged again, his smile fading slightly. Lighten up, Ethan. It was just a bit of fun. Fun? He thought this was fun? He had just taken the most personal and heartfelt thing I could offer and used it to make me the laughingstock of his wedding reception. Without another word, I turned and walked away. I couldn't stay there another minute. I needed to get out, to breathe, to try and process the sheer cruelty of what he had just done. I made my way through the crowded room, ignoring the curious glances and hushed whispers. I grabbed my coat from the cloakroom and headed out into the cool night air. As I walked down the street, the city lights blurring through my tear-filled eyes, a single thought echoed in my mind. I was done. Done trying to bridge the gap between us. Done trying to earn his approval. Done with Daniel. But as I walked further, the anger started to simmer down, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He wanted to play games? Fine. I could play games too. He wanted to humiliate me publicly? Well, maybe it was time for a little public revelation of my own. Because that letter wasn't the only thing I had been working on in the lead-up to this wedding. And Daniel, it turned out, wasn't the only one with secrets. The cool night air did little to soothe the burning anger that raged inside me. Daniel's laughter, the echoing snickers of his friends, the pitying glances from some of the other guests, it all replayed in my mind like a broken record. He had taken my vulnerability and stomped all over it. He thought it was funny? He thought it was just a bit of fun? He had no idea the storm he had just unleashed. As I walked, my mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what I knew, the suspicions I had harbored, the little inconsistencies I had brushed aside. It all started a few months ago, after Daniel and Sarah got engaged. They were constantly posting pictures on social media, the epitome of a happy couple. But something felt off, forced almost, especially with Daniel. His smiles never quite reached his eyes in those pictures. Then there were the hushed phone calls I'd overheard when I visited their apartment, the way Sarah would suddenly change the subject when I entered the room, the palpable tension that sometimes hung in the air between them, quickly masked by overly affectionate displays. I had chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, the stress of planning a big event. But now, coupled with Daniel's inexplicable cruelty, a different picture was starting to form. I remembered a conversation I had with Sarah a few weeks before the wedding. We were at her bridal shower, and she'd pulled me aside, looking unusually nervous. She'd asked me about Daniel, about his past relationships, about his financial situation. It was a strange line of questioning, and at the time I hadn't thought much of it. I just reassured her that Daniel was a good guy, albeit a bit competitive, and that he was doing well in his career. But now, those questions took on a new significance. Could it be that Sarah wasn't as happy as she appeared? Could it be that there was more to their relationship than met the eye? An idea began to take shape in my mind, a risky, potentially explosive idea. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the only way to truly make Daniel understand the depth of his betrayal. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the call button. This was it. There would be no turning back once I made this call. But the image of Daniel's smug face as he read my letter aloud solidified my resolve. I pressed the button. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered on the other end. "Hi, it's Ethan," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Daniel's brother." There was a brief pause. "Ethan? Oh, hi. What's up?" I need to ask you something," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Something important." The conversation that followed was brief but intense. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. I had my answer, and it was even more damning than I had imagined. I hailed a cab and asked the driver to take me back to the hotel. I knew I couldn't just disappear. That would be letting Daniel win. I needed to go back, to face him, to show him that he wasn't the only one who could play dirty. When I walked back into the reception hall, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The music was still playing, but the energy seemed a little less celebratory. Maybe Sarah had managed to get through to Daniel. Or maybe some of the guests had been as uncomfortable with his little performance as I was. I scanned the room until I spotted Daniel. He was standing at the bar, talking animatedly with a group of his friends, a drink in his hand. He looked like he hadn't a care in the world. Taking another deep breath, I walked towards him, my steps deliberate. As I approached, one of his friends noticed me and nudged Daniel. He turned around, his smile faltering slightly when he saw me. "Oh, look who decided to rejoin the party," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Feeling better, little brother?" I ignored his jab. "Daniel, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice low but firm. "Can't it wait?" he said, glancing back at his friends. "We were just in the middle of something." "No, it can't," I insisted. "It's important." He sighed dramatically. "Fine. What is it?" He stepped away from his friends, leading me slightly away from the noise. "It's about Sarah," I said, my eyes fixed on his. His expression hardened. "What about her?" "I just had a very interesting conversation," I continued, my voice calm despite the turmoil inside me. "With someone who knows Sarah quite well." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Mark," I said, watching his reaction closely. Mark was Sarah's ex-boyfriend, the one she had supposedly broken up with amicably a few months before she started dating Daniel. Daniel's face paled. "Mark? What about him?" "He told me something very interesting, Daniel," I said, leaning in slightly. "He told me that he and Sarah never actually broke up. In fact, they were still together when she started seeing you." The color drained completely from Daniel's face. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. "He also told me," I continued, pressing my advantage, "that Sarah is pregnant, not with your child, Daniel, with Mark's." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel just stood there, his eyes wide with disbelief, his face a mask of shock. That's not true," he finally stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "You're lying." "Am I?" I said, pulling out my phone. "Maybe you should ask Sarah yourself." I held out my phone, the call log showing the recent conversation with Mark. Daniel stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. He looked around the room, his eyes darting nervously. Sarah was across the room, laughing with a group of her bridesmaids. I don't believe you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why don't you go ask her?" I challenged. "Go ask your beautiful bride if she's been entirely honest with you." He hesitated for a moment, then his eyes narrowed. "You did this, didn't you?" he said, his voice filled with accusation. "You tried to ruin my wedding." "No, Daniel," I said, shaking my head. "You did this. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. You took my heartfelt gift and turned it into a joke. I just wanted you to know that you're not the only one who can play games." He stared at me, his face a mixture of anger and dawning realization. He knew deep down that what I was saying was true. The pieces were all there, the little inconsistencies, Sarah's strange questions, his own unease that he had probably tried to ignore. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped. He made his way through the crowd, his eyes searching for Sarah. I watched him go, a strange sense of emptiness washing over me. I hadn't expected this. I had just wanted to get back at him, to make him feel the way he had made me feel. But seeing him so utterly devastated, it didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. The next few minutes were a blur. I saw Daniel approach Sarah, his face grim. I saw her initial confusion turn to alarm as he spoke to her, his voice low and intense. Then, I saw her break down, tears streaming down her face as he led her away from the party. The buzz of conversation in the room died down as people realized something was wrong. Whispers rippled through the crowd, and all eyes were on Daniel and Sarah as they hastily exited the reception hall. My parents rushed over to me, their faces etched with concern. "Ethan, what happened?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. But after what Daniel had done, I didn't feel like protecting him anymore. Sarah is pregnant," I said, my voice quiet. "And the baby? It's not Daniel's." My parents stared at me in stunned silence. My dad's jaw dropped, and my mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The news spread through the reception like wildfire. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of shock and awkwardness. People started to leave, murmuring apologies to my parents. I stood there, watching the unraveling of my brother's perfect life, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. He had deserved this after the way he had treated me. But another part of me felt a deep sadness, not just for Daniel and Sarah, but for our family, for the broken bond that might never be repaired. My mom started to cry, and my dad put his arm around her, his face grim. I need to go talk to Daniel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, feeling utterly drained. The drama of the evening had taken its toll. I said goodbye to my parents and slipped out of the hotel, the silence of the night a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. As I walked home, I thought about the letter, the heartfelt words that Daniel had mocked so cruelly. Maybe it was naive of me to think that it could have made a difference. Maybe some bridges are just too broken to mend. I reached my apartment and collapsed onto my couch, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. I had gotten my revenge, but it felt hollow, unsatisfying. In the end, all that was left was the wreckage of a wedding, a broken engagement, and a deeper rift in my already fractured relationship with my brother. A few days later, I received a text message from Daniel. It was short and to the point. "We need to talk." I hesitated for a long time before replying. What was there left to say? He had humiliated me, and I had exposed his fiancée's betrayal. We were even in a twisted sort of way. But there was still a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that remembered the brothers we used to be, the laughter we used to share. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance, however slim, to salvage something from this mess. I texted him back, "Okay, when and where?" The reply came almost instantly, "Tomorrow, my place, 7 p.m. I took a deep breath. This was it, the final act. I had no idea what the future held, but one thing was for sure. Things would never be the same between me and Daniel again. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, only time would tell. But as I drifted off to sleep that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a new, and perhaps even more complicated, chapter in our lives.